Hello, I'm Robin and welcome to Molten Modular. Today I'm looking at the This Is Not Rocket Science Wobbler 2, or Wobbler Squared. Not entirely sure. The Wobbler 2 is an LFO and drum machine. Because of course it is. Because of course it would be. They're the two sorts of things that go perfectly together. No, not really. The Wobbler was originally released as an LFO some time ago, and it's fabulous. I'll show you in a moment. It's just bouncy, it moves, it visualizes, it gives creative offsets and phasing and strange, weird and deliciously funny things. It's great as an LFO. Now, This Is Not Rocket Science decided to produce some more because they'd ran out, and this is during the time of we had a bit of a crisis over microcomputers and other chips, and they could not get the chip that they made the original with, so they had to go for something else. And when they went for something else, they discovered they got all this yawning space within it that they're not using. So rather than just leave that empty and desolate, they decided to fill it full of drum sounds. And so we have an unintentional, if you like, Wobbler LFO with a whole bunch of drum sounds inside. So it's a little strange, feels a little bit disjointed and kind of what? But that's not important. What's important is that it's a phenomenal LFO. It's also quite an interesting drum sound source. Now, the drum sounds come from sort of methods of synthesis to start with, and then some samples. You've got enough control and play and movement and variation inside to keep you busy for quite some time. And so they just built the whole thing into here. They revitalized the interface, which is essentially the same, but just made all of the knobs dual purpose. So you can switch from LFO to drum mode and back again. It's quite fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to plug this thing in. I'll show you how the LFO works. Then I'll show you how the drum side works. And hopefully we're all going to have a lovely time during the doing of that. So first then, the LFO. The Wobbler 2 LFO mode. What do we have? Well, we have these fabulous looking curves here that illuminate and show us exactly what's going on with our modulations. Just look at them go. They're beautiful things. Look at that. It's such a satisfying display. So, yeah, that by itself is enough, isn't it? Don't you think? It's just lovely. Just bounces in, bounces out. Just gorgeous. So what is it that's going on here? Well, we have a number of different LFOs available from this main knob in the middle. We have regular LFOs. We have this phasing thing. We have the twang. We have the double pendulum. And we have sort of a sample and hold randomization. All of them are very, very usable. All of them are tweakable. And let me show you what each one does. Let me turn on a little bit of sound just so that we can experience what it is that's going on. The other thing I should say is that there are two, as you can see by the twangy wobbliness of this lovely two-pronged what's-it. Got one coming out of this side, one coming out of the other. So it is a dual-channel LFO, but the relationship between those two can get very, very interesting. I'd also like to bring this in at this time because it will fit. I'll get there somewhere. Because it might be useful in showing us exactly what is going on in terms of LFO. If I can get it to sit straight. Sit straight. There we go. Can you see? No, you can't even see that. Oh, it needs to sit there. That's where it needs to sit. Can I get that to work? Can I get that to go? How's that? That's pretty good. Don't be distracted by this. We need to be focusing on this is what we need to do. So we can see that we have a regular LFO. We're set to regular LFO. We've got this going, and you can hear that this is affecting the cutoff on my filter over here. Nicely. We have a frequency knob in the middle with which you can speed up the LFO, obviously. That's what we like. Do have a sync input as well if you want to keep it timed to your sequence or something like that. The knobs here at the bottom, we're only dealing with the left hand one at the moment. This changes the depth of LFO. It's like an attenuator. So I've now just got a little weeny one going. And if you go to the left or right, you're either going into positive or you're inverting on this side. And you also notice this little light down here. This is every single cycle. That will send out a pulse if you want to trigger or gate something else. You can do so with that. Nice. At the top here you have, let's put it up to full whack, you have two knobs that create differences to that modulation. Now that one doesn't appear to do anything, but if you notice the lights down here, it actually creates very interesting effect. Now if I bring in a second filter, so I've now got this side modulating one filter, this side modulating another. If I turn this knob up, you'll hear how the modulations go out of sync. And then back in again. So if you set it in the middle, they're now perfectly opposed to each other. So I've got this one going and then this one going, if you understand me. Got a slowly syncing oscilloscope. Put it just down to the one again. This second knob here changes the shape. So you've got a square. Bring it back a bit, it'll then turn into a triangle. A bit further it becomes a sawtooth. And then back to our sine wave again. So that's the basic idea, that's the basic layout. Frequency here. Phase between the two LFOs on this knob, and then some kind of shaping on this one. But this is only the normal LFOs. You've got 4 other modes in here. So the next one is phased. This is quite interesting. So you get an LFO within an LFO. So you've got an LFO moving with an LFO. Does that make sense? Next up, you've got a twang. Now, a twang needs a trigger. The idea of a twang is a bit like a bouncing ball or a twanging a ruler, in that it goes fast and then it slows down. Do you see? The length of the twang is dependent upon this knob here, so if I turn that down a bit. it reduces a lot quicker, put it nice and big, and it takes longer to decay. This knob here does the offset again, so you've got both of these going at different times. It's really interesting. Let's run a sequence through it. And as I say, you can patch in a gate into the trigger input. And then the next one along is a pendulum, which is a very similar idea. It's a similar twang, but instead you've got these two things going round each other as it goes round, which gives it a different shape. You can see the shape here up on the scope. And then finally you've got randomization. We could sync it up. And turning this knob adds a little bit of glide in. One other nice feature is that between each of these, it actually crossfades from one to the other. So you can go from sort of sample and hold through to pendulum, and then that mixes through to twang. Then sort of you get halfway between the phased one and the twang one. And then between that and a regular. Before finding itself on a regular LFO. And if you go a little bit further past that, you'll find a really, really slow LFO. So that's the LFO part. That's what the Wobbler already had. It's syncable, triggerable for the twang and the double pendulum what's it, morphable, offsettable, phasable, manually fireable, resettable, and CV controllable over every side. You've got 2 different outputs. You've got gates on the cycles. It's a really interesting and engaging LFO all by itself. Drum mode then. Or, as they say, bang on. Bang on. That's nice. So, with a push of a button, it becomes a drum source. Now, what is it exactly? Well, it's a linear drum source, a linear drum machine, which means that it's essentially one sound at a time. Now, I didn't quite grasp this to start with. In fact, I've had 2 other modules which do this that I've never fully understood until this one came along. And those were the Basimilus Iteratus Alter from Noise Engineering, which is kind of a noise machine. It's a strange digital glitch matrix of weird sounds, and I could never find a sound in there that I quite liked because I didn't really fully understand what it was I was trying to achieve with it. The other one is the DFAM, the Moog DFAM. Yeah, I know. I mean, it's probably one of the most talked about drum sound voices within small desktop synthesizers and Eurorack. People love it. They're always going on about, DFAM's just the best drum machine out there, and I've got one over there. And I don't get it. You got 8 steps, right? 8 notes, and it just sort of plays a thing that you're never really quite sure what it is, and you can't. What is it I'm trying to find? Am I trying to get a kick drum? Apparently, it's a whole drum machine. I can get a kick. Okay, I got a kick on everything now. But how do I get something else on the other ones? It's this linearity of it where every step needs to sort of change in order to build up an interesting rhythm. Of course, you can have it on one sound over and over again, but that gets a little bit repetitive. You want it changing. And I never really grasped that. However, when coming up to Synth East and I was having to perform, I was lucky enough to lay my hands on the Plankton Zaps that I've got in here. And I knew it was something that was going to be fascinating, and I knew it was going to be useful in my live performance, so I sort of just jumped straight into it without really knowing what was going on. But what I discovered is that this is similarly linear, monophonic, one thing at a time. And it was through running things into this and then modulating, that key thing, modulating, that I suddenly understood. Because through modulation, you could change to different sounds so that each part of the rhythm was something different. And then you ended up with this cascade of sound. It's not a pattern. It's not a rattling of hi-hats against a snare, against a clap, against a kick drum. It is an evolving, changing collection of beats and rhythms that then just starts to sing, to go off, to pull you off into other places that you weren't necessarily expecting. That's what Wobbler does. So fortunately, I'd had my epiphany with the Zaps. I will be doing a video on the Zaps fairly soon, but what that enabled me to do is approach the Wobbler differently, so that when it came to using the drums, I knew exactly what it was that I wanted to do. And that's what we'll do now. Now, first of all, I'll just take you through it. I'll show you where the sounds are, how interesting they are, and how you can change them. And then we'll get into modulating it and getting beats out in the way that I think you probably will want to do it. Because there's some challenges involved in that, which we'll come to in a minute. So for drum mode, you hit this button here. And the module is changed. It's not now an LFO and a drum machine. It is just a drum machine. So your outputs here are stopped. It's no longer kicking out LFOs out of here. So whatever it is you had that plugged into, that's no longer going to be happening. So these actually become the audio outputs. So when you're switching to and from drum mode back to LFO mode, just be aware that the outputs here at some times are a very slow moving oscillation, and other times are flipping drums. So let's take an output, plug that into something. There we go, that one there. And now we've got drums. We've got drums, I say. Isn't that interesting? So what the heck's going on? Well, first of all, I'm going to bring this back a little bit. This knob does unnecessary things. On one, if you go to the left, it compresses the sound. If you go to the right, it distorts it. Somewhere in the middle is nothing. So you've got to decide whether you want a little bit of distortive edge or a little bit of compression. We're going to go compression side for now, just so you can hear how everything sounds. So all the same controls are being used, but now we're dealing with drums. They've put the drum LEDs and little symbols around the outside to give you an idea of what they are about. So first of all, you've got kick drum type sounds. Then you've got clangy, clattery, woody type sounds. Springy type sounds, which are a bit weird. Snarey, hi-hat. So there's a lot of stuff you can do with them while you're there. So let's have a quick look at the kick drum. Obviously you've got frequency is still being used here, and this becomes pitch. But these two knobs at the top become something too. Whether it's length, generally this one deals with length, this one deals with modulation. Round to the wood block type sound. Round to the springy type thing. Nicely weird. Snare. And then round to hi-hats. And of course, if you pump some kind of rhythm into it, then, you know, it will probably get interesting. So let's take just a clock output from my PAMs here. It's going to there. Let's take that. Put that into trigger. So did you get the idea? So that's all very well if I want one sound, or I can just keep moving this about, but surely I'm going to want to modulate this so I can select different sounds. So sure, let's put in an LFO into here, and this will then take us through all the different sounds sort of automatically. Again, as it goes through these, you get this nice crossfade from one to another, so at times you can get both things going on at once. Do you see that before it goes from one to the other? It's really nice. Well, again, that's all very well, but it's not really doing it. We're not there yet. And the reason is that you want to be able to select these sounds as part of a pattern. You want to be able to select them intentionally. With an LFO, it's just rattling through them like, you know, nobody's business. That's not, I believe, that's not what you want. So what do we do about this? Well, this is quite a challenge. as it turns out. Didn't think that it was going to be quite so much, but no, apparently that it most certainly is. Because the range of this knob is like completely everything, all the way around. Every single bit is taken up with voltage. And so you need something which is able to range a complete plus and minus 10 volts, I think, in order to get there. So if I plug this in from my Molten motion meter down here and then turn it up, it's currently at the top here, and this is on 0. So as I turn it up, I can get all the way across here. That's about half a turn. So if I perhaps offset this all the way to the left, will I be able to get the whole range? So this is 0 here. Now I'm turning through. Now I'm all the way round, that's 10 volts, and I'm only coming up to the top. So I haven't captured the whole bit. Can I get somewhere in between? Because this knob doesn't seem exactly linear when controlling it from control voltage. So there it's gone a bit higher, and I could dial it down to the bottom. I can now get around to the snare, but I can't get around the full distance. If I then invert it, so I then go in negative, I can move this around to here and then rewind backwards or something. If I put it in the middle, right, I've now got it inverted. I can go to that left hand side of 10 volts. If I then invert this to the right way round, I can then attack the top half. Are you with me? So it's an enormous range of CV that needs to be doing that. And a lot of modulators that we have in order to modulate it are sometimes only plus and minus 5 volts. And so they can't actually access all of these sounds. So I spent quite a bit of time trying to find something which is going to allow me to sequence the changes between these sounds. Now I did it on the Plankton Zaps, which you can see down here. Pull out a little bit. I did it on the Zaps in my performance because this has a function where you can set the sound selection CV to be essentially chromatic. So it's a different sound on every note on a keyboard in an octave. So 1 volt per octave. Within that single volt, you had 12 segments that selected the 12 sounds. Brilliant. The Wobbler doesn't have that. So we have to find another way to do it. So I started off with things like the Variegate 4 Plus down here. Now this is a sequencer. It's got sliders, which seems kind of ideal. And I will show you what happens. So we're going to take the first channel out. So channel 1, put it on notes. Just going to put this all the way down to the bottom so they are all equal. So that's currently at the bottom of its range, and it's all selecting the kick drum. So if I put one up, the highest it can go is to the snare. It's not bad, but it's not quite all the way around. You see how that's immediately more interesting? But what it can't do, sadly, is reach the hi-hat. I can offset it, so now that it is, but now it's no longer hitting the kick. So frustrating. It's so nearly there, but not quite. That's still a lot of fun though. See, it's a marriage made in heaven. It absolutely is. Something with sliders as simple and sequenceable as that, running with it is just brilliant. But sadly, just not quite. Not quite. So what other choices do I have? Well, funnily enough, this sequencer here does give me some interesting options. So it has a wider range is all I can say. So I can use this, go all the way up to the top, and it should give me everything. Give me everything. There we go. So I've got kick drum and snare coming up. It's not quite as lovely and intuitive as a Varigate 4 Plus. Now, by intuitiveness, I mean moving of sliders, not actual operation, because this is far more intuitive than the Varigate 4 Plus is ever going to be, because it's a bit of a complex nightmare. But simply just moving sliders compared to moving these knobs, this is an easier game. But this is the one that can manage to do the full range. Once you get everything set where it's supposed to be. And then with just a small adjustment of this knob, you can kind of change exactly what it's hitting on. It's the interaction of all this stuff that makes this so much fun. So I've just put a bit of a sample and hold into the length or decay knob, and that's given me this nice occasional sort of accented decay, like an open hi-hat to another hi-hat. Oh, it's just so good. I mean, I think for me, it works really well, mostly as percussion as opposed to an entire kit. Because you can't always get that kick drum to sound right compared to all the others. It's like once you've got the kick dialed in, because everything is following the same settings, this then drags everything else down as well. You kind of want to be able to separate them out into different sounds, but you can't really do that. So in many ways, you'd probably use this in conjunction with a kick drum. You know, something nice and juicy like the Mandrake I've got sitting over here. just loves a bit of modulation. So I could introduce a bass line back into this, because there's one other little feature which is worth talking about, which is this side over here. So if this is kicking out all of your drum sounds, what's happening over here? Well, over here it's kicking out envelopes. Every envelope, every sound is generating an envelope around that sound, and that's being extracted and pumped out of here. So you could use that, for instance, to duck a VCA to do a little bit of side chaining. Or you could use it to control your filter, just a little bit. I don't quite know how effective that is. Quite interesting. But we're not there yet. One more thing. It has an entirely different drum kit inside. If you press and press that, you're now onto a sample kit. But I fear I better explain this a little bit better. So it's very much the same idea, but now the sound set is based on samples. So I think you've now got essentially 7 kits, each with a bunch of its own sounds. So over on this side, you've still got decay on this left knob. Then you've got the different kit sounds on that knob. So come round to the next one. And to the middle one.
Clack, 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 clack. Tick, 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 tick. Tick, tick.
So let's set something running again. So I want to get back to controlling this knob now that I've got my new drum kit loaded. I'm going to use a different thing in order to do that. I'm going to use the black sequencer down here, because this has a modulation mode. Rather than trying to give it individual notes, I'm going to give it modulation, because that gives me a positive and a negative, which makes it really quite easy to select the sound I'm after. Or at least I think so. So if I take the modulation out from here, plug it into our middle knob, I should, with a bit of luck, Well, heck, you can play with that all day with no trouble at all. It's a lovely thing. I mean, the choice of sounds is different. It's got this weird froggy, twangy thing in there, which you don't often find in any other form of drum sound source, I don't imagine. You know, the kicks are not blistering. I as I say, I really like sort of backing it up with the Mandrake here. That just produces this of a kick, which underpins it really nicely. But there are those sorts of sounds in there if you can tease them out for percussion, for moving about, for creating these interesting cascades of rhythms that you can constantly fiddle with, constantly change, and I'm going to do that, and then move, and then every adjustment finds a new pattern, a new rhythm, a new thing to lock into. It's pretty brilliant, pretty brilliant. It leaves you with that quandary, though. Do I use it as an LFO or do I use it as a drum source? Why should I need to have to choose between these two things? What is it? Why have they given me this choice anxiety over what to use it for? Does that mean I need two? Do I now need two of these? Because I like the LFO. The LFO does interesting things and could do great changes and creative stuff within my patch. But on the other hand, the drums are so fun that I want to be using those all the time, in which case I've lost an LFO. I mean, that's how it feels. It feels a bit like I've gained something, but I've also lost something. And I'd quite like to have both of those things. So in some ways, it would be nice if This Is Rocket Science came out with just a dedicated drum module. That would kind of be cool. And then I wouldn't feel like I wouldn't feel bereft of these LFOs that I seem to no longer be able to use because I'm now using it in drum mode. Damn it. Or you could see it as fulfilling many functions within your system. So it could sit there and it could be LFOs. And if you want it to be drums, it could be drums. That's the glass half full kind of look at it. And that's certainly to be commended, I think. I mean, ultimately, you've got a module in there which is doing far more than it ever should do. I mean, maybe that's the way you look at it. You buy it as an LFO and then go, oh, wow, it's got all this bonus content. Maybe that's the way to look at it. Or buy it as a drum voice and then go, heck, I can use this to modulate stuff. In a more ambient patch, for instance. Yeah. It does leave you with those questions, though. Not quite sure how to reconcile it exactly. But hey, the synth sounds, the drum synth sounds inside are interesting and playable. Everything reacts well, depending on where you want to put it. Want to put it here, want to put it there, or whatever. You may find that you might struggle to find the right modulator in order to hit all of those points. But with the right placement of this, sometimes it just needs to go a bit off so that the spread gets it. You can usually find it. I was initially kind of frustrated because I couldn't... every sequencer I seemed to have was only positive and would only send out positive voltages, which means I could only address sort of a half or to 2/3 of it. And that had me running around a bit going, oh no, but I can't. How do I get to trigger the sounds? How do I choose the sounds with CV? However, the 8-step sequencer can do it. The Variegate can almost do it. It nearly throws it enough. You might have sample and hold on something that can do it. I mean, that's quite a simpler way in terms of using an LFO or a random generator, which might do very well. Otherwise, as I say, the modulator side of the black sequencer was very good, and it could probably do it if you use notes as well. It's just a matter of tying down exactly where you find those notes. I mean, I really liked the option in the zaps that allowed you to do it chromatically, because that way I could just use an octave on a keyboard in order to trigger all the sounds and sequence those. And in actual fact, in my gig, I used the stochastic inspiration generator, because that's got an octave worth of sliders, which are all based on probability, stochastic probability. And I could just slide up the ones that hit the sounds that I wanted, and the further I pushed them up, the more often they would sound, if you're with me. And that was quite brilliant. But with this, they are spread around the voltage, and you're just going to have to find them with whatever sequencer you're using. But that's not difficult. And you can see with the Variegate, I was able to just play it around and it would find it. On the black sequencer, you can hit the magic button and hit modulation, and it will come up with a pattern that will probably work. So you can stumble into it. You can throw yourself into it. It doesn't have to be hard or complicated. And all I'm just trying to point out is that the sounds are wide. So you need to be able to fish in a wide range of control voltage in order to pick those out. And if there was a way of narrowing that down a bit, I think that would be a good thing. Now, according to This Is Not Rocket Science, the samples are sort of set at factory and you can't replace them as such as yet. If you wanted a different set, you'd have to get in touch with them and they'd have to work on that with you and getting them uploaded. But I get the impression that there's a possibility that you could, perhaps, potentially, in the future, replace the samples. But as it is, they're a fun bunch of sounds, very, very usable and surprising. It's got a load of vocal bits and pieces in there too, which is quite good fun. And it is, for me, I think, that the synth side, which is the most natural, the ones that flows the best. The samples are kind of like fun, and you would use them, you wouldn't use them. You would probably be a bit more intentional with them, I think. Whereas the synth sounds, yeah, they're just totally great. The ability to extract an envelope out of here, I haven't fully explored that yet. I was using it a bit on the filter, but to use it to pull down a VCA on a bass line to allow like the kick through or something like that is quite interesting and useful. And it's like This Is Not Rocket Science just thought, let's just do everything. Let's put in as much as we possibly can. And they certainly did that. The compression versus distortion bit on here is interesting. You kind of pushed one way or the other, I suppose. The compression side seems to be what I'm favouring at the moment, but it depends on what you're after. You can get some good crunch in your faceness out of that. So there you are, really. That's the Wobbler 2, the Wobbler squared. It loves modulation. It is modulation, and it's also a drum synth. Who'd have thought it? Hope that was helpful, and in the meantime, go make some tunes.